finding rainbows in the cloud. Let us begin with today's sessions. At the School in the Cloud Learning Lab in the village of Korakati, India, students sit on colorful stools in front of computer screens, talking over Skype to educators in England and Germany. So, it might be surprising to discover that this high-tech education center was built in a place that can only be accessed by boat and rickshaw, where electricity was sparse and internet connectivity did not previously exist. In this digitized age, technology is being used by everyone: students and teachers, bosses and employees. Even after abundance of its usage, we still fail to give technology the credit and recognition it deserves. We haven't once tried to tap into the internet's infinitely huge ocean of knowledge. However, we are tremendously glad that someone did. He brought information technology to present-day classrooms unconventionally. I am talking about the 2013 TED Prize winner, a Leonardo European Corporate Learning Awardee, and the man behind the hole-in-the-wall experiment. Yes, we have amongst us Professor Sugata Mitra, one of the greatest educationists of the 21st century. A polymath, scientist, educational researcher, and speaker, Professor Mitra is a professor of educational technology at the School of Education, Communication, and Language Sciences at Newcastle University, and also the chief scientist emeritus at NIIT. He is widely acclaimed for his creative experiment on effective children learning the hole in the wall. Professor Mitra has been awarded the Best Education Research Article in an open access journal and the Divag Mehta Award for Innovation in IT, and has also been attributed with more than 25 cognitive science and educational technology inventions. We are truly privileged and honored to have you with us today. I accord a warm welcome to you, sir. The audience are requested to type in their questions for sir in the question and answer box. We shall take them up if time permits. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. It's always a little different talking over Zoom because obviously I can't see who I'm talking to, which is a bit strange. So it's a bit like, talking to yourself, but I've gotten used to it over the last 2 years, as I guess have many of you, because of the pandemic. So you heard a little bit in the intro about my old experiments, but then, the hole in the wall, that's more than 20 years ago. Many of you were not even born then, or very little. It only pointed the way towards a different kind of world and a different kind of education. But for the next 20 years, nothing really much happened. People listened. I got a lot of awards, this, that, and the other thing. But how much did schools change? Very little. What was I trying to say? I was trying to say that children, given access to the internet, can learn almost anything by themselves. A lot of people either did not like it or did not believe it. You know what is ironic? In the end, the pandemic brought it home. Suddenly, a virus closed the entire education system down. And I'm talking of, early 2020. We were all at home. How are we going to eat? How are we going to go to school? What happens to work? What happens to friendships? Who else can we talk to? How do we talk to them? In the middle of the lockdown, the entire world was struggling with these questions until we realized that between us and the virus, there is a friend, an ally, the internet. And since that time, it has stood between us and the virus, fighting everything the virus can throw at us, providing all the tools with which to build vaccines, to distribute, all over the world, to bring back education, to bring back friendship, to get food delivered, everything. Can you imagine what the pandemic would have been like if we did not have the internet? Just think for a moment, and you'll realize we would have just come to a halt. But we didn't. So what I'm going to talk about today is not so much about my old experiments, but the consequences of those experiments, what those experiments were trying to say when they repeatedly showed that groups of children using the internet can learn things by themselves. What does that mean today? What does that mean during the pandemic? And what does it mean after the pandemic? Let me share my screen. Okay. And there we are. So, you heard in the introduction that I was going to talk about a rainbow. Well, I am in a way, but that rainbow is not human. That rainbow is not even physical. That rainbow is the internet. You must remember something about the internet. And I could point it to you by simply asking you a question. Everybody knows that the internet exists, right? I mean, what a question. Of course it exists. We're using it right now. Well, my next question would be, where is it? Well, if you think about it, is it inside your computer? No, sort of. Is it in the air? Kind of. The internet doesn't have a physical existence. It is everywhere. That is the nature of a network. It doesn't have a physical existence, but nevertheless, it exists. It is an idea. And if you look at that screen, you'll notice the one thing that a virus cannot deal with is a non-physical idea. So there's the battle in front of you. Virus versus the internet. Well, so where do we go from there? What happens next? First of all, you'll hear people say all the time, when we go back to normal. And I keep thinking, what does that mean when we go back to normal? Go back where? To 2019, before the pandemic? Well, why not 2018? Why not the year 2000? Now, that's not such an easy question to answer, because in life, we often don't have the choice of going back anywhere. I mean, you know that, motor cars, vehicles, buses, trucks, they're causing a lot of carbon dioxide pollution in the atmosphere, which in turn is causing climate change or contributing to climate change. So what shall we say? Could we say, let's go back to normal and go back to the horse and carriage? Do you think that would solve the problem? Well, it probably would, but shall we do it? I'm sure we won't. We must understand we may never go back to where we came from, even if we could. And that is what schools all around the world need to realize and think about. So, where shall we go? What are the choices that we have during the pandemic? If you see on the left hand side, is more or less what schools everywhere are doing. We are creating virtual classrooms over the internet. And then we're saying they don't work very well because, I'm the teacher and there's this virtual classroom, but I can't actually see all the students, or I see them as little postage stamp size images. That's not good. That doesn't work. We start blaming the technology, but it's got nothing to do with the technology. You're trying to create something using a medium that was not designed for that purpose. You are trying to make a motor car behave like a horse and carriage. That's not going to work, no? If you say, well, I connected a couple of horses in front of my car and I told them to pull it, but then the car was too heavy, this technology doesn't work. But that's what we tried when we began making virtual classrooms over the internet. We tried to copy the pre-pandemic environment as closely as we could. Let's imagine that the student who is sitting at home will believe that he is back in school or she is back in school. It's exactly the same. Well, it is not. It is completely different. So it wasn't even worth trying. Let's teach vigorously, just like we do in school, and try to figure out if anyone is paying any attention. Well, how are you going to figure that out? I mean, can I make out right now how many people are listening? Can I make out if they're paying any attention, if they're understanding? I couldn't even make out that my voice wasn't getting heard. So was that a fault of the technology? Of course not. It was a fault of the attempt to create an environment that this technology was not designed for. Then comes the question, quizzes, exams, CBSE, ICSE, GCSE, all of that. What's going to happen? How are we going to conduct examinations over the internet? It's impossible. You see, students will cheat all the time. Nobody ever said, do we have to conduct those exams? Do we have to go back to normal? Is that normal? Well, for those of you who are facing a big exam shortly, next year or something like that, if I were to ask you, do you think it's very normal, the exam? Sitting alone in a room full of people, but not allowed to look right, look left, not allowed your phone, not allowed access to any books, given a question, and you're asked to answer it from your mind, like a TV quiz game show. Is that normal? You ask yourself. So, what else can we do? Well, some schools broke out of that sort of thing. I encouraged them. And they created chat groups, social media groups. That worked fine. Everybody was on it all the time. They created new learning environments that I'll talk about in a moment. And they understood and realized something that is really very obvious. It's a stupid statement, number 3 on the right-hand side. Do not teach learners what they can learn by themselves. What can be more obvious than that? But do we ever take learners and ask them, okay, today I'm going to teach you about ceramics. Do you think you could learn this by yourselves? Well, no teacher ever asks that. She just says, I am going to teach this to you today, whether you can learn it by yourselves or not. Well, that's the time when the student then says, where's my phone? Why have you taken my phone away? And the school says, nothing doing. You can't use the internet. All right. Have we ever used any other method of assessment instead of CBSE exams? What are we trying to figure out? We're trying to figure out if you know math and science and the arts and everything. Can't I just sit across the table and say, listen, how good do you think you are at math? Do you like math? But if I'm a close friend, and if nobody knows that this conversation is being broadcast and that this is a one-on-one conversation, chances are you'll tell me the truth. You'll say, well, I don't particularly like math. Yes, I can pass an exam if you absolutely insist. They don't like the subject. Is that allowed for assessment? Not in the least bit. Imagine a CBSE certificate which says next to math, student not interested. Why not? So what can we do? What are some of the new things that I tried during these last couple of years? I was stuck in Calcutta for almost 18 months, and I was doing this all over the world using the internet. It's amazing. From Iceland to Australia, sitting in my study in Calcutta, just as I'm sitting in my study right now in this little city called Gateshead in England. So what can we try over that sort of environment? Well, practice. There's nothing to stop you from practicing stuff. You don't need me for that. Experiment. Yes, if you have the apparatus, if you have a target, you can experiment. What can I as a teacher learn from children? A lot over the internet, a lot. Look at any of your grandparents, for example. Have you had the experience where a grandparent asks you to solve a little problem on their mobile phones? I'm sure many of you would have faced this. And you would say, no, that's simple. Your grandparents are willing to learn from children, but your teachers often are not. And then read about others' experiences. These are some of the things that you can do on chats and social media and video conferencing. We often forget that these are the good things you can do because we are so transfixed by the idea of the bad things that they can. Oh, they'll waste time all the time, and there's bullying on social media, and there's this, that, and the other thing. But so what? I mean, are buses bad because people can fall off them? Well, you just try to prevent people from falling off them, but otherwise buses are good. They take you from one place to another. It's the same with the internet and with social media. We have to learn to focus on the positive and to use those positives rather than focusing on the negatives and then stopping it from entering into schools. There are many kinds of learning environments that you can make using the internet. What I've tried, here's a small list of the things that I've tried. Breakout rooms during video conferencing. It's possible to create breakout rooms, and maybe some of your teachers have tried this. And then you invite people to say, okay, the four of you go into breakout room number 1, and 4 of you go into breakout room number 2, and so on. And there in the breakout rooms, you can discuss amongst yourselves, then you come back and you put your ideas together. There are some other fun things to do. I've tried several of these. A walkabout with a smartphone. You can take a smartphone like this one, put it in your breast pocket like this so that the camera sticks out. Put on headphones, connect to somebody, anybody, a group of people, or whatever, and walk. And ask them to tell you where to go. It's amazing. I've tried this in Calcutta with children in England who then say, oh, what's that shop on the left? And I say, oh, that's That's a tea stall. Oh, but it doesn't have doors. No, we have a kind of climate where we don't need doors. Oh, how cool is that? And what are they frying? Oh, they're frying pakoras. What are those? I go close up and say, hey, can you see those? Oh, dumplings, they said. We had a great time, okay? You can walk about with a smartphone. Could you have done that without the internet? No way. You can take people from one place to another, just like that. There are other things you can try. Only voice and no video for language and communication. You can try this with your friends if you like. If a friend says, I have something very, very important to tell you, tell her, okay, switch your video off. Now tell me, when you're speaking and your video is off, there is no point in making hand gestures because nobody can see it. If you tried this in school, in language courses, you will notice an immediate improvement in communication. I have seen it across the villages of India, east, west, north, south, everywhere. Children who would start talking more slowly, more clearly. Children who would ask each other, "Samajh mein aaya?" and pause. How often do we do that when we talk to anybody? We assume that he has understood everything, and then we have a misunderstanding. And then we say, oh, but you didn't actually understand. Well, you can create an environment with only voice and no video and train people to talk. And then you can create only video and no voice. We had an instance of that in this talk some time ago. And what do we converse with? For gestures and pantomime. Imagine a situation where a friend says, I have something very important to tell you. And you say to him, okay, switch your audio off and tell me. So now what do? I can take a piece of paper, write things, show it to you, make hand gestures. I use the language of the mute. It's a wonderful language. You suddenly realize that what you wanted to express comes out completely differently if you're not allowed words. Only the internet makes that possible. Self-organized learning environments. When I first did the hole-in-the-wall experiments in Delhi and then all over India, I went on to do them in Cambodia, in South Africa. These experiments were very simple. You take a computer, just put it anywhere. Put it in the middle of a road, put it into a wall, in a village or whatever. That's why they were called the hole in the wall, the computer stuck in the wall. And children were allowed free access to the internet on it. When we learned that children can learn to do this by themselves, I took this whole idea across to England. And inside the classrooms of Gateshead, the city where I live, we created the self-organized learning environment. How does it work? It's very, very simple. You ask a question. Instead of teaching, let's say I wanted to teach about ceramics. I might start by saying, if a teacup is made of mud, would it still be usable? What would we have to do to it to make it usable? That would be a big question. I don't teach you the answer. I simply ask you the question. I don't supervise you. I just tell you, okay, I'll give you 15 minutes. Use the internet. And then come back after 15 minutes and tell me what you found. You know what I will get in 15 minutes? My lesson on ceramics, coming out of the blue. It's a different role for a teacher, an upside down role. You might say, so do we not need the teacher? Of course you need the teacher. You need the teacher to raise the right question. You don't need the teacher for the answers, because the answers are everywhere. Assessment. How do we test? How do we examine? Well, to the teachers who are listening to this, would you agree that no one knows your students better than you do? Not even their parents. You've been with them for years and years and years. You know each child. So, what is it that you want to examine for? You know, the highest degree we have, it's called the PhD. Uh, where you, how does it work? You're given a big question, a research question to which no one knows the answer. For 3 years, you struggle with it. For 4 years, 5 years. Finally, you write a thesis, either an answer to the question or a partial answer to the question. And there is no examination. What there is a verbal examination called the viva. You sit across the table from 2 examiners, they ask you questions, and at the end of that conversation, they say, you're good. You know what you're talking about. You can have your PhD. Why can't we do that in class 6, in class 9, in class 10? Why can't your math teacher sit across the table from you for just 15 or 20 minutes and figure out how much math you know, and then give you a mark? It becomes a conversation, not a threat. And then you might say, well, you know, the teacher might have a bias, and I get along with my geography teacher, I don't get along with my Hindi teacher, etc. Well, use a panel of teachers. That's how they do it in PhDs. If 2 or 3 different teachers were evaluating, and if they didn't agree with each other, then you know there's something wrong. If they agreed, your exam's done in 15 minutes. Why don't we assess that way? Because we want to assess using a method that was invented more than 200 years ago for training, for military training, where everybody has to know everything exactly the same amount. You can use an examination for that sort of thing. If you've taught someone how to tie a knot, then you could give them a piece of rope and say, tie a knot. If you can tie a knot, you get 100 out of 100. You cannot tie the knot, you get a 0. But that's not how you would test for English language proficiency or geography or history or whatever. We need a panel of teachers. We need a conversation. So what are our choices after the pandemic? I don't even know when after the pandemic will come. I mean, it's still on. We were waiting for our next wave, or we are just done with our wave, or whatever. India is waiting for the next wave. England is waiting for the current wave to subside, and so on. Well, I think here are some of the choices we have. We could say, okay, everything is back to normal. The virus is gone. Let's say that happens in 2022. Now we're going to, well, it's okay. We can forget about all that Zoom and everything. Let's just retain a little bit. We could retain all the hygiene habits. But why should we? I mean, we never did all that before the pandemic. We can create a hybrid model, physical and virtual presence. Oh, that is too hi-fi. I mean, in any case, the secondary board is not asking us to do that. We can use self-organized learning environments. Well, who wants it? Nobody. I mean, is ICSE asking for it? No. We can change assessments from memory to comprehension, but nobody wants comprehension. They want memory, etc. How do we break out of that? Retain a few virtual environments, a few virtual elements, just to make the parents happy and everybody happy. Just so that people don't think that you're old-fashioned. Don't waste your money. It's better to throw all that junk away and go back to the classroom, if that's how you think. Retain all hygiene habits and practices. Have you guys noticed what everybody in the world is beginning to notice? That in the last 2 years, when we were all wearing masks, maintaining distance, and, washing our hands and that sort of thing, apart from COVID, have you noticed almost nobody got a cold. It's only beginning to enter everybody's heads now. Gosh, I didn't catch a cold for a year. It's never happened to me in my entire life. I always catch 2 colds every year. So do we want to go back to catching colds every year? You know, masks, hand washing, and social distancing stops not just the COVID virus, stops all viruses, any virus. Why should we not retain those to whatever extent possible? The incidence of disease in your school will decrease, and the children will learn to be healthier. Is that such a bad thing? So, what do you think? Shall we go back to normal? Throw away the masks? Keep your dirty hands? Hug and kiss each other all the time? You decide. Oops. New assessment models. You can assess comprehension, communication, and computing skills instead of memory. Just 3 things, you know: comprehension, communication, and computing. You don't need anything else today. Think of what you do with your mobile phone, with your smartphones. You just use these 3 things: comprehension, communication, and computing. And you can solve almost any problem you want. Should we learn things in the first 17 years of our life and then say, now I'm ready to face life? Well, the world isn't like that anymore. The problems that we will face in the future have no bearing on many things that we learned in the past. So the answer to why you are taught all these old things is just in case if you need it. Trigonometry. Why do I need to know trigonometry? Just in case if you need it. Volcanoes. Why do I need to learn about volcanoes? Just in case if you need it. Well, why can't we change that to, if you do ever need it, I will teach you how to pull out your phone and learn it just in time. Think about that. It's a dramatic shift from keeping everything in your head to figuring it out instantly, quickly, and accurately. And use subjective and conversational methods for assessment. Like I told you earlier, you know, don't stress out people by giving them question papers. Just ask them and figure it out for yourself how much they know. Reduce the stress. And finally, we must remember that the purpose of education is to enable people to live happy, healthy, and useful lives. Do you agree with that? But there's very little to disagree with, isn't it? Happy, healthy, and useful. That's what education is for. Every school, every parent, every teacher, and indeed every student must keep this in mind. The purpose of education is to enable people to live happy, healthy, and useful lives. Well, all of this stuff, you know, I mean, I've finished what I had to say. And if you are interested in more references, well, there are 3 books which you know, people who have done education as a subject in the university may have read some of them. The Hole in the Wall, which talks about the old experiments; Beyond the Hole in the Wall, which talks about the British experiments; and The School in the Cloud, which talks about what I did with the $1 million TED Prize. If you're interested in scientific research and research papers, then here's a paper you can get. You can download it for free, actually. Children and the Internet, Learning in the Times to Come. It was published quite recently in the Journal of Learning for Development. So look for it on the internet. It's very easy to find. And finally, if you are a school and if you're a teacher and you want to know, well, what should I do after I've heard all of you? I've heard everything that you said. So what should I do next? Well, there's a tiny little book which talks about a whole lot of examples of what you should do and how you should think at this point in time. It's called, as you might imagine, Virus versus the Internet. And you can get it from Amazon. It's a bit difficult to get in India, but there are ways to get it. I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out. Well, that's what I had. I hope it made some sort of sense, and I hope I didn't sit on my microphone again.
No, sir, we could hear you. We could hear you perfectly, sir. And thank you so much. After such an enriching and informative session, we look forward to transformational learning environments and out-of-the-box techniques to learn and discover new things. We would now like to open the floor to NIB Smile ambassadors who are very eager to interact with you, sir.
Okay. Come on, guys, ask a nasty question.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
What aspirations? Yes, sir. Namaste, sir. What aspirations did you have as a child? Were you always interested in science?
Yes, actually, I was. In ninth standard, one of our teachers made us write a one-page saying, write down what you want to become when you grow up. So I still remember what I wrote there, although that piece of paper is lost. But I wrote there that I'll try to become a scientist. And I'll keep on trying. But if I fail to become a scientist, then I'll do the next best thing I can do, which is I know how to write. So I'll become a writer. And as it turned out, I became a little bit of both.
Thank you, sir.
So, while I completely agree with you that we focus too much on the negative aspects of the internet and forget just how much it has revolutionized, I do want to focus on one specific problem, which is addiction. So how would you handle concerns of addiction to technology, taking into account how alluring internet and social media have become today?
Yeah, it's a good point that you're making. But, I'm from another generation, and I'll tell you about another addiction that we had when I was a child. There were children who were called bookworms. Have you heard this term, bookworm? They read all the time. And my grandmother used to say, don't do that. Don't keep on reading all the time. It'll spoil your eyes. I mean, she used to tell my mother, your son is addicted to books. Okay, we know now in retrospect that it wasn't such a serious problem. I mean, yes, I read some bad books as well as I read some good books and all of that. So something similar is happening with the internet. But I want to make one other point, okay, very important for all of you guys to think about. We access the internet increasingly on little screens like that. Isn't that so? So if I'm looking at my screen like this, you have no way to tell what I'm looking at. No way. But on the living room TV, if you got addicted to the living room TV, could you look at anything that you shouldn't be looking at? You can't. Why? Because it's too big. Everybody can see what's going on. Our big mistake is to give children, particularly little children, big mistake to give them little screens. We should buy them a big high-resolution monitor, put it in the living room, and tell them you can do broadband internet and look at whatever you want. That'll solve the problem completely. No filters required, nothing. I've been saying this for years and years, but you know what? Nobody's listened. They keep looking at their tiny phones not because of children, but because the adults want their tiny phones. God knows what they do with it.
So I'm sure all the parents here will start listening. Thank you.
I hope so. Thanks.
Hello, sir. Talking about social media, I believe you did talk about how it can be used for learning. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, my whole approach to learning has been to tell the learners what is it that I want them to learn. Okay, first I must convince you. Suppose I am your teacher and I'm going to teach you something. I should first be able to convince you that it's worth your time to learn this. If you don't agree with me, then you'll never pay any attention. Okay. So first of all, let's assume that there are 4 of you. 4 is a good number. There are 4 of you. I tell you that, okay, I'm going to talk to you about RNA and what it is and why it's so important, something like that. And let's suppose that the four of you then agree. Then I would say to you, well, I don't know much about it myself, except that it's a very interesting subject. So why don't I give you 24 hours? You guys figure it out. That's when social media comes in. So you'll go on to Facebook and say, we've got this crazy teacher, he says he wants us to learn RNA, but doesn't know anything about it himself. And then it goes on here and goes on there and goes on to YouTube and it goes viral here and there. And finally, somebody from Ethiopia says, I know a lot about RNA. Let me tell you all about it. And then the problem gets solved. So that's how social media works. It didn't exist before, so teachers don't understand it. And they think that all you're doing all the time is wasting time on it. But if you look at your behavior on social media and analyze it, how much time do you actually waste as opposed to how much time do you spend on fairly meaningful conversation about how people are, what their problems are, what the solutions might be, about new subjects, about your stresses and your strains and all of that. And as I said before, if you had a big screen, you would spend a lot less time on social media than you would now. Okay, you wouldn't do chitter chatter on a big screen where everybody can see that you're wasting your time. But if you were having a conversation about RNA with a child in Ethiopia, you don't care if your screen is big. You would continue to do it, right? So I want to stress again, big screens, big screens.
Yes, sir. I believe that will bring out the true meaning of connectivity on social media.
Yeah.
Sir, most of us think language is a barrier, but your experiments have proven otherwise. Do you think this information can be used to conserve vernacular languages?
Yes, I was, it's a very nice question. I was I had a mixed opinion about it. I thought that eventually we will all have to come to the conclusion that we cannot survive without English. Okay, that out of the billions and billions of people on the internet, English will continue to be big language. I used to think that. I was wrong. I didn't figure out how quickly other languages would start coming into the internet. It happened much faster than I thought. And it happened because of popular pressure. I mean, let's say that a person knows only Gujarati. He too wants to be able to look up Wikipedia and to do Google searches and so on and so forth. Other people figure, well, there's some business in this. Why don't I make a Gujarati version of Wikipedia? Why don't I do this and that? There were people who developed fantastic algorithms for online translation. Okay. Initially, we used to laugh about it. We still laugh because it makes horrible mistakes. But the point is, it works. By and large, it works just fine. The time will come very quickly where I could be speaking in Bengali, you could be replying in Tamil, but the conversation will come out in English automatically. It's just around the corner. When that happens, the entire meaning of language will have changed. It will no longer matter whether you have vernacular or not. And coming to the original bit, that what should we do with the vernaculars? Of course, the vernaculars must exist. Some of the best literature, some of the best poetry in the world is in languages which are not English. We can't afford to let that go. But luckily for us, the internet is taking care of it. The technology will even out the barrier.
Thank you, sir. Whatever you said reflects in the internet.
Yeah, well, that was good questions. Go ahead.
So, what is one major reform you would like to bring about in the education sector?
Just say again. I couldn't hear the first part of what you said.
My question is that what is one major reform you would like to bring about in the education sector?
Okay. So her question was, what's a major reform that I would suggest?
Yes, sir.
Very simple, very straightforward. Okay. I want the examination system to be changed completely. This whole idea of you've got a A+ in physics and you've got a B- in history doesn't mean anything. I mean, what does it mean? You might love chemistry and get a C in chemistry, and you might dislike physics and get an A+ in physics, and the system will say you have to study physics. Why can't we go back to a system which says, here are the things that I like, and here are the things that I'm good at. And they're not always the same. Just think to yourself, there are things that you like and may not be very good at. You wish you were good at it. And there are things that you're very good at, but you don't particularly like doing them. The examination system doesn't take that into account, and it must. So my quick answer to your question, we have to change the examination system.
So we have access to a vast amount of knowledge thanks to modern technology. How can a student of Seoul learn to discern between useful information and misinformation?
Well, that brings me to another important point. I talked just a few minutes ago, I talked about the big screens. Remember that a big screen is safer. The second thing is groups of children or groups of learners are safer than individual learners. Think to yourself, if there were 4 of you, you and 3 of your friends, and you are looking up the internet on a big screen, which all 4 of you can see at the same time, isn't the probability that you will get fake news and not be able to figure it out, isn't that reduced a lot? Because you see something on the screen and one of your friends will say, "Hey, bakwas hai, this is useless stuff. Don't look at that. Look at the website. Look at the website address. It doesn't mean anything." 4 heads are better than 1. And in a self-organized learning environment, what I create are 4 or 5 groups of 4. So 16 or 20 people. So if there are 20 people, you make 5 groups of 4 with 5 big screens. Then you give them the question. And let me tell you this, you'll never get them to believe any false information. The group will self-correct. Okay? It's a fantastic ability that human beings have of being able to self-correct and get to the truth if they're in groups. The whole problem is in being alone with a tiny screen.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, sir.
Thanks.
Sir, how would you handle subjects that children may not necessarily be interested in learning about through the method of minimally invasive learning?
It's a question of whether you can make a question that is interesting enough. I'll give you an example, okay? A rather hilarious example. In London once, I was having a similar meeting physically before the pandemic. And the teacher said, "Professor Mitra, I am going to give you a problem you won't be able to solve." I said, "What's that?" She said, "My subject is gum health." Gums? Gum health. And she said, "There is nothing less interesting than that in the entire universe. So you tell me, how can I make 7-year-olds interested in gum health?" So there was this challenge. So I went in feeling quite nervous. Gosh, how am I going to do this? So there they were, 7-year-olds. Now, obviously, if I said, "I have come here to teach you gum health," they'll all fall asleep. So instead of that, I said, how many of you have missing teeth? And because they're 7 years old, many hands went up. Okay. "Oh, I've got 2 teeth fallen out." I said, "Oh, that's odd. So what's going to happen to you? 2 teeth have fallen off." So they said, "No, sir, don't worry, they'll grow back." So I said, "Oh, that's even more amazing. First of all, why does it fall off? And secondly, why does it grow back?" And they said, "Well, it's baby teeth." I said, "Well, I mean, it's obvious you don't know the answer to that. And I have another question. So they fall off, they grow back. If they fall off the second time, then what happens?" Then they said, "Oh, they don't grow back the second time." So I said, that's even worse. They grow, they fall off, they grow again, and they fall off the second time and they never grow back. Do you know why that happens? By now, the 7-year-olds are sitting up and saying, do you know? They said. I said, no, I don't know either. But you've got the internet. And 30 minutes later, we had a lesson from the 7-year-olds about how gums hold the teeth and how gum health is very important. So then I told the teacher, I didn't tell them that. They told us why gum health is important, and that's better learning than anything you can imagine. So do you get a flavor of what I'm trying to say? You have to create the right question. If you can't, then whatever you were trying to teach is actually very boring. And so that I would say to your teachers, that if you walk into a class and if you're not really, really, really interested in what you're teaching, go home.
Thank you, sir, for that hilarious anecdote.
Thank you. Okay, I think I better be off, I've my time's almost up. Where is everybody? There you are.
So
okay.
Yes, sir. A few questions from the audience. Can you spare a few minutes for that?
Okay, let's do 3. Okay.
All right, sir. So would you take one more from the students and then we move on to the audience questions?
Okay.
All right. The next person can ask the question and then we'll move on to the audience question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Sir, can a traditional school incorporate self-organized learning environments, the SOLs, in their pedagogy without altering much of their infrastructure? And do you think it is practical?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to incorporate. It doesn't require any expensive changes or anything like that. And many schools in India and in many other countries have already got rooms which they use for doing SOLs. I have some lovely pictures. If your principal is interested, I can send her those pictures. All those books contain the design. So the design is very simple. More importantly, when should you do it? According to me, at the moment, you should do it up to 9th grade, 9th standard, maybe 10th, but not more than that, because then you've got the big exams coming. And remember, a SOL doesn't help you with the exam, because the SOL is about working together, working with the internet, up to that. So I would recommend to schools that they should set up a SOL environment, and they should conduct SOLs from a very young age up to the 9th standard, so that the children get used to using the internet properly. After the 9th standard, as long as the system doesn't change, you have to tell all the learners like yourself that, I'm sorry, I couldn't change the system. So for the next 2 years, memorize everything, regurgitate it in the exam, and then forget about it.
Thank you, sir. And we would love if you could share your designs, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, just ask them to send me a reminder email. I'll send some pictures.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Principal ma'am would like to respond to that. She's just...
Sugata sir, I would love to receive those photographs.
Okay, all right.
Do other sessions as well. You are a NIBS Mitra now, so we will be hounding you for a lot of things.
Okay. Thank you. I'll send you whatever I can. So yeah, it would be a good idea if you set up these rooms, and if the teachers sort of, if once one teacher gets the hang of it, then she can explain to everybody else. It's quite simple. And I can put you in touch with people who know how to conduct these sessions. They will show you 1 or 2 sessions, and then you take over.
That'll be great, sir. That'll be great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Yes, Indu ma'am, carry on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So, sir, this was a very interesting and thought-provoking session. And as a teacher, I was taking notes of about all the ideas that you came up with, the methodology that we can use in class. The walkabouts are a wonderful idea. I never thought of it. Yes, but yes, it's definitely a brilliant idea. And even the pantomime, I mean, it's amazing for a language. I, being a language teacher, would love to use
Okay, you would understand. Yes, that's right.
Yes,
and even this whole idea of talking just a voice without the video. You'll notice how many mistakes we make because we think that people can read it in our faces.
Yes,
So,
often the communication, yes.
Yeah, that's right. So we say, yes, 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 like this, but without realizing the other fellow can't see your head nodding.
Absolutely, sir. So, sir, the question is kind of in the sense that we were talking about soul schools and ideas and all of those things. But this particular question that has come up is about Slumdog Millionaire. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, of course.
So,
Yeah.
sir, the question is that the way it was portrayed, it's claimed that it's based on your experiment. So, do you think it was a befitting kind of a portrayal of your idea there? We just wanted to know your opinion.
Well, I mean, I actually know the facts. You see, when the Slumdog Millionaire film won those awards, the BBC here in England, they interviewed the writer of the book which became the film, and his name is Vikas Swaroop. He's basically an IFS officer, and he wrote a book called Q&A. So BBC interviewed Vikas Swaroop and said, "What made you write a story like this?" And Vikas Swaroop says on BBC, when I was a lot younger, there was a man who conducted an experiment called the hole in the wall. And that became my inspiration for writing this book. And I was teaching my class in Newcastle University when one student sort of burst into the classroom and said, "Sir, BBC is talking about you." So I said, "Okay, what about me?" So then I wrote to Vikas Swaroop and I said, "Is this right? I mean, I'm very proud to hear that." And he said, "Yes, sir, I really remembered that experiment and I wrote it." My only comment to you and other viewers is that Vikas's story was how self-organized learning can help you win the Kaun Banega Crorepati. But I wanted to say self-organized learning can help you become a professor. And that is perhaps a better objective than to win the Kaun Banega Crorepati. And I said that on another interview with the Guardian newspaper. And I said, it would have been so much better if Vikas's story ended with one of those children becoming a professor. And guess what? The Guardian wrote an article, a huge article here in England. And the title was, with my picture, the title was Slumdog Professor.
Yes, that was very interesting. I'm so happy that we asked this question. So another question, and this is the last one, virus versus the internet, the book, I think the most recent, right?
Yes.
Was this book written after the pandemic set in, or was it already written in a different context and different thought behind it?
No, I get your question. I wrote this in the middle of 2020 from Calcutta, because I was on meetings over Zoom every day with teachers like yourselves, because, you remember in 2020 how confused we all were. And they used to talk on Zoom and saying, "Sir, what should I do? Should I organize a class over the internet or should I not?" So I kept talking. And after some time, I realized that there were 15 things that I was talking about. So I said, why don't I just write this down in a really tiny book? It's only 50 pages long. And put these 15 ideas for teachers to say, just keep this in your mind and then address this issue of internet education. So that's how that book got written, in the middle of the pandemic.
All right. So the children and the internet is easily available on the internet. We could read through it also. But virus versus the internet, I couldn't even find an extract from that book. So
no, that's difficult. I'll tell you how you can do it. Good thing you asked. These are called POD books, meaning print on demand books. And Amazon doesn't have a print on demand service out of India. So it will say not available when you look it up on Amazon. But there is a website, it's an amazing website. It's called bookdepository.com. Okay, bookdepository.com. You can order any book under the sun from anywhere in the planet, and they don't charge you postage also. They will charge you just the price of the book and it comes. But then the downside is it takes 4 weeks. Okay. So if you're planning to buy for the school, then you should buy 3 or 4 copies. Many of these schools have done that. Buy 3, 4 copies together and from book depository, get the books and then give it to the teachers. That sort of thing.
And we'd like you to send us one autographed one as well, sir.
Yes, as soon as I get one. But the problem is that I have to buy one myself as well. So, but yes, no, I will do that. I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. It's lovely meeting all of you, and all the best for your school, for yourselves. And well, what shall I end with? I'll just end with the line I started with. Don't go back to normal, okay? There is no such thing. All right.
Yes, sir. Definitely, sir.
See you then. All right. Bye now.
That was truly an exhilarating session. And I must say that your innovative ideas in education will enthuse, inspire, and ignite the young minds to think truly out of the box. Not only did we all learn today that technology and internet is a driving force during the pandemic, but also that accepting reality as it is the right choice to make. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with the Smile community, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye.